This is a Neanderthal woman who may have lived between 35 and 400,000 years ago.
Scientists just recovered a complete human genome from a bone fragment buried in a German cave for 49,000 years. And the data inside it is rewriting the entire timeline of human history. Not updating it, not refining it, rewriting it. The man this genome belonged to was walking through Ice Age Europe at a moment that should have been impossible, carrying genetic evidence that forces scientists to recalculate when our species first mixed with Neanderthals.
Long before Homo sapiens began to populate the Earth, another human species had established itself across much of the Eurasian continent, the Neanderthals.
Who the first Europeans actually were, and why his entire population, organized, culturally sophisticated, and fully human, vanished from Earth without leaving a single living descendant. Every textbook account of early human migration now has a problem it cannot explain away. This is what 49,000-year-old DNA just revealed, the cave that started everything. The discovery starts in 2016, when archaeologists excavating the Ilsenhöhle cave in Ranis, Germany, find 13 bone fragments scattered among stone tools dating back 45,000 years. Some fragments are so small and fragile that a few came from infants. The bones lie alongside a type of stone tool called LRJ, Linkombian Ranesian Gersmanovichian blade technology, that had puzzled researchers for decades. Nobody could agree on who made these tools. The craftsmanship was precise. The design was deliberate. The blades required planning, skill, and a deep knowledge of how stone fractures and holds an edge. But the central question had never been answered. Were these tools made by the last Neanderthals?
The leg bones were shorter than they should be for a child that age. How come the legs look like a Neanderthal? Some of the teeth look like Neanderthal, the others look like modern human. How do you explain this?
Desperately clinging to a landscape they had dominated for 200,000 years? Or were they made by the first modern humans, the ones pushing into Europe from Africa for the very first time? That question had enormous stakes. Get it wrong, and you misplace the beginning of us in Europe by tens of thousands of years. Geneticist R.F. Sumer's team extracted ancient DNA from all 13 bone fragments and ran the analysis. When the results came back, the answer was unambiguous. The bones belonged to at least 6 modern humans, not Neanderthals, modern humans. 3 were male, 3 were female, 2 were infants. And when the team mapped the genetic relationships between them, they found something that stopped everyone in their tracks. One individual was a mother, another was her daughter. Others were distant biological relatives. This was not a random accumulation of casualties at the back of a German cave. This was a family, part of an extended kinship network stretched across hundreds of kilometers of frozen European wilderness.
This modern human child with a very nice chin has some, Neanderthal body proportions. Something strange is going on here.
But here's the thing. Mitochondrial DNA, the kind easiest to extract, only travels through the maternal line. It tells you part of the story. To get the full picture, R.F. Sumer's team needed nuclear DNA, the complete genome, and that required a bone fragment preserved with extraordinary, almost impossible precision after 49,000 years underground. One femur bone, cataloged as Ranis 13, gave them exactly that. He was a man. We don't know his age when he died. We don't know if he died in that cave or was carried there. What we know is that he walked through Ice Age Germany 49,000 years ago, that he was part of a family, and that his femur preserved his genome so perfectly that R.F. Sumer could reconstruct it, chromosome by chromosome, at high resolution, as if he'd donated a blood sample that morning. And 230 kilometers away in Zlatykůň, Czech Republic, there was a woman. She'd been found years earlier, a complete skull, same time period. Before we get to what her genome revealed, consider her for a moment. A woman living in Ice Age Bohemia, in a world with no written language, no permanent shelter, no agriculture. A world where winter meant genuine, constant proximity to death. She hunted or helped those who did. She raised children or helped those who did. She maintained relationships with people she may not have seen for months at a time, across distances that took weeks to walk. She was fully human in every sense. And then she died, and her skull sat in a cave for 49,000 years, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. When R.F. Sumer's team sequenced her remains, the data showed she was a 5th or 6th degree relative of 2 individuals from Ranis, connected to them, part of the same extended family network, 230 kilometers away. These were not isolated wanderers stumbling separately through an empty continent. They were a population, small, spread thin, but connected, maintaining family bonds across distances that would take weeks to traverse on foot, sharing a stone tool tradition distinctive enough that archaeologists can identify it across half a continent, somehow surviving in one of the harshest environments Earth has ever produced. Ranis 13 and the Zlady Kuhn women are now the oldest high-quality modern human genomes ever sequenced. And what those genomes say about who these people were, and what happened to them, is what makes this discovery genuinely hard to sit with. But the bones belonging to modern humans, that's just the beginning. Because the bones being here, in Ice Age Germany, 49,000 years ago, with these specific genetic signatures, that's when the story gets strange. Written in bone.
And all of this Neanderthal ancestry is the result of interbreeding between early modern humans and Neanderthals.
When geneticists analyzed the physical traits encoded in the Ranis and Zlady Kuhn genomes, what they found rewrote the picture of who the first Europeans actually were. Dark skin, dark hair, brown eyes, not pale northern Europeans, not the populations that would dominate this continent tens of thousands of years later. These were people whose bodies had been built for African sunlight, who had left the African continent only a few thousand years before they ended up in those German caves. Think about what that means for the timeline. 50,000 years ago, their ancestors were in Africa. 49,000 years ago, they were building fires in German caves and hunting reindeer. Across Czech steppes, with skin and hair calibrated for a completely different world. And they were doing this while sharing the landscape with Neanderthals, a species that had occupied Europe for over 200,000 years. Neanderthals had broader nasal passages to warm, freezing air before it hit their lungs, stockier builds to conserve heat, a metabolic efficiency refined over 200 millennia of Ice Age selection. Every biological adaptation these newcomers from Africa lacked, Neanderthals had already solved. And get this, the stone tools these dark-skinned pioneers left behind were sophisticated enough that archaeologists spent decades arguing over which species created them. The answer turned out to be a small family group, numbering only a few hundred people in total across the whole of Ice Age Europe, pushing into the unknown with better tools than anyone expected and a kinship network that defied the distances between them. Here's what the data cannot yet tell us, what it felt like to be Ranis 13, standing in a forest designed for a different kind of human, making the same tools his distant relatives were making, 230 kilometers away, in a world where 200,000 years of evolutionary competition was sleeping in the same hills. But his genome does tell us something else, something that reaches forward out of 49,000 years of silence and touches every single person watching this right now. If this story is the kind of thing that keeps you up at night, if the question of where we actually came from matters to you, subscribe to Vault of Discovery, because what comes next in this timeline is the part that changes everything. The interbreeding that changed everything.
Fossils discovered during the last 2 centuries in the Atlantic Ocean and in Siberia have shed some light on these mysterious archaic humans.
Here's the twist that reframes the entire human story. When R.F. Sumer's team analyzed the Neanderthal DNA segments inside Ranis 13's genome, they dated the interbreeding between our species to between 45,000 and 49,000 years ago, thousands of years more recent than previous estimates. That might sound like a technical adjustment. It is not. Every non-African person alive on Earth today carries Neanderthal DNA, from China to Peru, from Norway to Australia. Roughly 2 to 3% of your genome, if your ancestors left sub-Saharan Africa, came from a different human species. Not metaphorically, literally. A detectable, heritable genetic contribution passed down through every generation from that moment to right now. What Ranis 13's genome reveals is that this didn't happen gradually across centuries of scattered contact. It happened in one major event, around 45,000 to 49,000 years ago, a coherent ancestral population of modern humans encountered Neanderthals, mixed with them, and then dispersed across the entire planet, carrying that genetic legacy inside them forever. Ranus 13 was there. His genome carries the timestamp. He was alive at the exact moment our species and Neanderthals became permanently part of each other. No descendants, no trace in any living person, just the timestamp. That's not a minor detail. That's a man who was present at one of the hinge moments of human history and whose entire bloodline then vanished from Earth. Which brings us to the part of this story that keeps geneticists awake at night. A lineage that vanished.
Once the salvage operation was complete, the bones were removed to the National Museum in Lisbon, where we are today.
Researchers found zero evidence that the Ranis and Zlati-Kun population contributed genetically to any later population anywhere on Earth. Zero. Not a decline, not an absorption into another group. A complete disappearance. No descendants, no genetic echo. An entire branch of the human family tree, organized, culturally coherent, snapped off, and fell into silence, leaving nothing in the DNA of any of the 8 billion humans alive today. By analyzing shared DNA segments across the ancient genomes, researchers estimate the total population consisted of at most a few hundred individuals spread across a large territory. Conservation biologists classify any wild population under 500 individuals as critically endangered. The Ranis population lived their entire known existence below that line. Do the math, a few hundred people. Ice Age Europe. Temperatures dropping to minus 20 degrees Celsius. Megafauna hunted with stone-tipped spears. Competition from Neanderthals with 200,000 years of evolutionary head start. And a family network holding together across 230 kilometers of frozen wilderness with no written language and no way to communicate faster than a person could walk. They lasted approximately 80 generations, roughly 2,000 years. 80 generations of parents who raised children, taught them to make the same distinctive stone tools, kept the kinship bonds alive across impossible distances. And then they didn't. No descendants, no genetic legacy, nothing. But here's what makes this even stranger. Other ancient humans from the same period show signs of much more recent Neanderthal interbreeding. Neanderthal ancestors just 10 to 20 generations back. But Ranus 13 and the Zlati-Kun women show none of that. Their Neanderthal DNA comes exclusively from the ancient shared event. Nothing that happened after they arrived in Europe. They lived alongside Neanderthals for 2,000 years without interbreeding with them once. Think about what that says about social structure 45,000 years ago. These weren't disorganized wanderers. They maintained kinship networks spanning hundreds of kilometers. They kept a shared technological tradition distinct enough to identify archaeologically across half a continent. And they maintained cultural boundaries that no Neanderthal ever crossed for 80 consecutive generations. They knew exactly who they were, and they still went extinct. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because here's what the data cannot answer. Was their extinction inevitable, or was it one bad winter away from not happening at all? Why some survived and others didn't? While the Ranis and Zlati-Kun population was disappearing, another wave of modern humans was moving out of Africa. This is the group that would eventually become all present-day Europeans, Asians, Native Americans, and Oceanians. They carried the same Neanderthal DNA from the same ancient event. They faced many of the same conditions. They succeeded where Ranus 13's people did not. The question that haunts paleoanthropology is simple. Why? Was it population size? The second wave may have arrived with larger founding numbers and more genetic diversity, enough to absorb the demographic catastrophes that can wipe out a small population in a single season. One brutal winter, one disease hitting a band of 30 people, one failed hunt with no fallback. For a population already at the edge, any one of those is extinction. Was it timing? A slightly warmer climatic window might have made the difference between a population that could grow past the critical threshold and one that could not. A few degrees of temperature, a few extra weeks of hunting season, numbers that matter when you have 200 people and no margin. Was it technology we can't see, better clothing, more efficient fire making, a hunting strategy that worked in a wider range of conditions, innovations that left no archaeological trace but made survival arithmetic just barely work in their favor? Or was it something no genome can ever reveal? Social organization, language complexity, the ability to coordinate across a larger group. cultural practices for managing conflict, rituals that bound strangers into allies and expanded the population when it needed to grow. Here's what the data cannot tell us: whether the Rani's people failed because of something they lacked, or whether they simply ran out of luck, whether their extinction was structural inevitability, or a coin flip that came up wrong 100 times in a row. That distinction matters enormously, and we cannot resolve it from bones alone. Research analyzing 51 ancient genomes from Ice Age Europe shows that beginning around 37,000 years ago, all Europeans descend from a single founding population that persisted through the coldest period of the Ice Age and re-expanded around 19,000 years ago as conditions improved. Those prehistoric populations carried 3 to 6% Neanderthal DNA. Today's humans carry about 2%. We've been quietly outgrowing our Neanderthal inheritance for 40,000 years, as natural selection gradually removed variants that cause mild problems in a modern human genome. Large-scale climate studies confirm that Ice Age Europe devastated human populations repeatedly and without mercy. Some Western European populations went completely locally extinct during the coldest periods, replaced entirely by groups migrating from the east. Population modeling suggests some bands may have consisted of as few as 20 to 30 individuals, moving across the entirety of Europe as a single territory. At that size, a single bad generation is not decline, it is extinction. The difference between vanishing and inheriting the Earth came down to factors so small that we still cannot name them with certainty 49,000 years later. What this changes. The Rani's and Zlatykun genomes, published in Nature in December 2024, answered questions that had troubled anthropology for decades. We now know with genomic precision when modern humans and Neanderthals interbred. We know the first Europeans had dark skin and African features. We know that small pioneer populations pushed into Ice Age Europe and that some of them failed completely, leaving no genetic descendants anywhere on Earth. But we still don't know why some survived while others vanished. We don't know whether the Rani's population's extinction was written into their numbers from the start, or whether a single different winter, one more surviving infant, one different migration path, could have meant that some of us are descended from them today. What we know with certainty is this: Ranis 13 died 49,000 years ago. His genetic line went extinct within 80 generations. His DNA, preserved by accident in a femur bone in a German cave, now reveals a chapter of human prehistory that nobody knew existed before December 2024. A pioneer population split from the main out-of-Africa migration, pushed into Europe, coexisted with Neanderthals for 2,000 years, maintained family connections across 230 kilometers of frozen wilderness, and then vanished completely. No trace, not one living descendant among the 8 billion humans alive today. They were us. Same species, same cognitive architecture, same capacity to love their children, mourn their dead, and teach the next generation everything they knew. Same hands that could strike a fire, same minds that could read weather, navigate by stars, and remember a landscape across seasons. And extinction found them anyway. So ask yourself this: if a population of modern humans with the same intelligence we carry could survive 80 generations in Ice Age Europe and still disappear completely, what does that tell you about how fragile the thread of survival actually is? Ranis 13 has no living descendants, but he has something almost none of the billions who came before him can claim. He has a name in the scientific literature. He has a published genome. He has a place in the story of humanity that will now be told for as long as we tell stories about where we came from. That's not nothing. For a man whose bloodline ended 49,000 years ago in an Ice Age cave in a world that was trying to kill him, that's everything. The science keeps moving. More ancient genomes are being sequenced right now in labs across Europe and Asia. More lost populations are waiting to be found in bone fragments that look, to an untrained eye, like nothing at all. The Rani's discovery opened a door into a part of our past that nobody knew existed, and the question it leaves open: why some of our ancestors survived the Ice Age and others vanished without a trace, is one that researchers will be working on for years. When those answers arrive, you'll want to be here. Subscribe to Vault of Discovery, so you are. And one final thing worth sitting with before this ends. The Ilsenhöhle cave in Ranis didn't just preserve bones and genetic data. It preserved a picture of what survival looks like when it's stripped down to its absolute core. No cities, no stored food, no infrastructure of any kind, just a small group of people, biologically identical to us in every way that actually matters, making daily decisions about where to move, what to hunt, and how to keep the people they loved alive through one more winter in a landscape that had not been built for them. We look at the 8 billion people alive today and assume there was always something inevitable about modern human dominance. The Rani's population removes that assumption completely. They had the same brain, the same capabilities, the same potential as every person alive right now. They still hit a wall their children's children's children could not climb past. What separated them from the populations that survived and multiplied may have been thinner than we want to believe, which group happened to be slightly larger when one particular winter hit, whose territory happened to sit on a migration corridor that provided the margin of calories needed to make it through. The distance between extinction and becoming the ancestor of everyone alive today may have been exactly that small, that random, that dependent on nothing more than circumstance. Ranus 13 lost that lottery. He left us his genome instead, and because of one femur bone in a German cave, preserved for 49,000 years by pure accident, we now know something true about ourselves that we could not have known otherwise. The story of humanity is not one of inevitable triumph. It is one of contingent survival, near extinctions repeated, again and again, and a handful of populations who made it through conditions that erased everyone around them for reasons we are still, 49,000 years later, struggling to fully name.